Hi. So I'm here with Dr. Courtney Bolton, and I'm super excited to hear what she has to say. We had a conversation, what was it, a couple of weeks ago now? Um, and I was just like loving hanging on every word. So I'm excited to have her here to talk to you guys. So I'm going to pass it off to you now, Courtney.
Yeah, hey, I'm really excited to be here today. Happy Earth Day. Such a strange way to be celebrating, but
Yeah.
I'm glad that we can actually be talking about this. And one of the things that I love as a child and parent psychologist is that what we're living through right now in terms of the pandemic has really opened us up to having a lot of conversations. And we're getting to share a lot of the research that, even though it doesn't directly apply to pandemics, it does apply to child development and routines and kind of creating environments in which they thrive no matter where we are. So we've been having a lot of conversations with parents around that and with moms in particular about how to juggle. I think the hardest thing that's happening for us right now is it's really bringing a lot of issues that may have been fringe, like self-care for parents and creating schedules and routines and talking to kids in developmentally appropriate ways, and sort of thrust everything on our laps all at once. And so I've been having what feels like a lot of very accelerated conversations with parents about how to handle behavior and how to create sort of a new normal and a new schedule that works for families while also giving themselves a lot of time and patience to just sort of ease into what does look like for them and how it gets tailored to their lives, because it's not obviously a one size fits all, but we're just pulling the best from research that we can and trying to apply it in these kind of crazy confines of
Yeah.
sheltering in place and, and different
Yeah.
things. So
Well, it's
it's been really
interesting. I mean, you are on the child side and I'm on the parent or the mother side. And so
great.
it's kind of the same thing, right? I coach people through the transition into motherhood, how to take care of themselves. And this is
Yeah.
almost the same thing, right? It's this new transition. We're thrown off our game, off our routine. What can we do to take some action to regain a little bit more feeling of control? And I think part of that is the parenting. I have so much mom guilt these days that I had figured out how to alleviate before, and it's all coming back again.
Yeah, I actually hear that a lot. And with my work, although my focus is on like the child and family, I do a lot of my work with parents, and I don't see kids without seeing their parents. That was something that happened at my work when I was at UCLA. Was we would bring kids and parents in together, and we put them in separate groups a lot of times, but we did a lot of parent coaching because you can't teach kids one skill without really coaching the parents on how to effectively handle those issues as they arise.
Totally.
And so if I teach them something in clinic and their parents respond in a completely different way, then the expectation kind of gets reset, right? So, but one of the big things that comes up is, moms feel like self-care really is self-indulgence. And that's something that there is an indulgent, like it can get to that, but like just caring for ourselves is like fundamental. And so I have
Absolutely.
to actually check in with a couple of things. So what I have them do is if they're engaged in a self-care practice, which I highly recommend right now, is I kind of have them check in after that practice and see, okay, did you feel recharged? Like, did you feel like it was necessary and you came out of it and you were more present, or you kind of more able to like engage in your goals?
Mhm.
Or did you feel like you just wanted to spend more time in that moment and you weren't really ready to retransition? Because that is one of those things where when we think about indulgence, it's more of a like an apathy in terms of coming back, whereas self-care has a purpose attached to it. And that
Right.
purpose is to recharge so that we can fill up and redo what we, kind of go back into our lives and our world. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
that's exactly where where I coach my clients, and it kind of like the cobbler's kids have no shoes. I feel like I sometimes ignore my own advice, and I have to remember what I tell my clients. Like I wouldn't tell them that this is okay. Here's the structure I would give them. I need to apply it to myself too.
I say that a lot to people that I work with, where I say, do as I say, not as I do, especially for people in my community. Like if you
Mhm.
see, but part of that too is everybody has a different set point, right? So
Mhm.
the other thing about it is like I'll give parents really specific advice to handle like a specific issue that they might have. So discipline or whatever the case may be. But that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily following those steps every time to a T, you know?
Yeah.
So I do. I'm acutely aware, and I've got 4 kids. So if people see me out in public with different children, it, you know, it depends on who I've got. I may honestly be throwing someone over my shoulder and walking out of Target or whatever with full on tantrum happening. So I know it is hard.
It's nice to hear it happens to you too. I mean, no offense, but
no, I mean, look, I think that's what is so beautiful about parenting, right? It's existential. I mean, it crosses all boundaries. Not everyone, I may handle things a little bit more differently or like with a very specific goal in mind, but usually when people come to me, it's because they have like a certain issue or they're preempting something and they want to get ahead of it. And so one of the areas of self-care, actually, one of my areas of focus, because I work so much with parents, is actually on how to battle stress effectively. And so the research that I did coming out of UCLA and coming out of University of Colorado Children's Hospital was all about like how moms in particular handle stress. And we identified 6 areas. I've added a 7th now based on sort of my work in private practice. But we kind of have these 6 main areas that we look at and this is one of those other litmus tests for, is it self-care or is it self-indulgence? So for the moms who, are afraid to go into that world of like self-indulgence where they think, it doesn't serve their families, I really encourage them to look at kind of 6 areas and their purpose. Do you find purpose in what you're doing? Do you have meaning behind it? Do you have a passion? Do you have something that like really fills you up, like that brings you like long lasting joy? And then I always contrast that with pleasure, and pleasure is different than passion, right? So pleasure, there's like kind of quick hits that like bring on the oxytocin. So like that can be the indulgent factor. Like those are little and like fleeting indulgences. So like a massage or a hot bath or for people, if you like to run, like getting out and running or hiking or just being outdoors. And then we talk about, power and like what we're able to control within our households. So some of us, I think, especially right now, are feeling like the world is completely just, willy-nilly and outside of our control. And, we're stuck at home. But there are things within our domains at home that we can control. And that really helps. And then the last one is people. And so, really kind of filling our cup with the people that we love. And this is a huge one for moms, because what we know from the research on stress is that we tend to, it's not just fight or flight for parents, but for moms in particular, we fight, flight, or we gather. We actually, it's shown in sociology and evolutionary psychology that we weather stress better when we pull people around us. And so a lot of my work is on kind of building those communities and belonging, because that really does help us buffer stressful events. And so this is a particularly interesting time because our people are all scattered. And so we have to make time like this to connect with them, whether it's by phone or by, text messaging or Zoom or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, as an introvert, like just classic introvert, I am, it depletes me to be around people. It fills me up to be alone. And I'm realizing as a mom, there's this weird balance of that because, I think I need to be alone to kind of recharge, but then feeling isolated from other moms in this community that I have where I can ask questions and commiserate, that is kind of a new thing where I get to still recharge and be around people. Like I'm an introvert who loves people. That's what I've always known. It's just exhausting for me. But that is something that really does fill me up. So I have to remember to put it on my list because it's not ever been on my list of things that fill me up before. So it's a really cool thing to realize, but also really evident right now that like, oh, that is one of the missing pieces and I need to make kind of a bigger effort to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's always really interesting. I have a few introverts in my family, and talk a lot about like the misnomers about being introverted. And the thing is, having 1 to 2, it doesn't have to be like an army of people, but just having 1 to 2 close people that you can reach out to. And it doesn't mean that they have to constantly be in your face, right? That like we tend to gather our villages when we need them. And then they sort of can go back into like the daily mechanics of things, whether it's the weekly phone call or whatever it may be, but just kind of having those people to help buffer, stressful life events is really, really important. So yeah,
Totally.
that's great point. So
And one of the things that you said, there are two things that you said in the list of things that you can call upon when you're trying to provide yourself with self-care. One of the things was power. Like, how do I regain power? And that's a big thing that I work on. And, one of those an exercise that we do is we find power statements around the things, like what are our mental blocks? And let's create a power statement to give ourselves when we realize we're entering into one of them, when we realize that talk is coming back. And, part of it is creating the mindfulness to even identify that, and then creating a power statement. And for me, this power statement that I came up with is like, kids are selfish, like Darwinian, like they are selfish in a way that's how they survive. So it's not like because it's bad,
yep.
but they're going to keep asking for my time and my energy. And as much as actually that is one of the things that fills me up is spending time with them, I can't, as a people pleaser too, see, I'm giving you all my issues. I can't keep giving to them, and I can't feel guilty that their feedback is they need more. And so I also have to be confident in what I have put in place for myself, that this is okay. This is a fine amount of work, life, self-care, family balance, because I created that for myself, and I need to be confident in my choices, not listening to their like, you don't spend enough time with us, you work too much. And understanding, okay, sometimes I can listen more and be like, okay, I think I do. But when I'm feeling like, how do I juggle this then? I have to give something up. I have to remember, no, you don't. You can do this. They're just going to keep asking. They love you. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, I love that. So there are a few things that you said in that I love, and I love that you acknowledge the fact that the idea of kids being selfish is Darwinian, right? I would say kids are craving your time, or that they are very adaptive would be the word that I would flip it a little bit, but it's true. They are so right? They thrive in the presence of us, and I think one of the things that I have been talking to a lot of my parents about lately over the last few weeks has been, how do I create space for like my kids, for me, for my marriage, my partner, whatever it may be. And one of the things that I really encourage, whether you are a routines-based person and schedules work for you or not, is to create a schedule, because kids thrive in schedules. And
Yes.
one of the things that we have found is, if we sort of, my husband and I, if we, if he takes the mornings and I take the afternoons, and regardless of who it is or what it is, as long as we kind of have like these set morning rituals, and they kind of know we talked about this earlier, by 3 o'clock, that's when they can ask for screen time. They won't ask before that because they know it's coming. And so if the more that they can anticipate and the more that they get a schedule reiterated, not only the like more contained they are because they feel really secure in that, but also the more freedom and flexibility it gives my husband and I to get our work done. So they know like their schoolwork happens while our work is happening. Then it's lunchtime, and then we've got PE. That's kind of our free time. That's when my husband and I tend to switch off. So he'll take the older kids for PE, and I'll have the younger ones.
Okay.
He'll try to take all four outside, which is also a little bit. We had a bloody knee right before this, but so, you never know. But it gives you kind of flexibility within confines of a schedule, and so you can change what your day looks like, but you kind of have that set. We have a morning activity, we have afternoon snack, or lunch, and then, PE, afternoon snack, and then everyone kind of gets like a break and free time. And I look forward to that like 3 o'clock break, because that kind of is my time to unwind and then get ready for dinner and nighttime routines. So, but I do, it helps.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about the routines, because we always say kids thrive off routines, they need routine, and it's so true. And I think what we forget is kids are miniature versions of us, right? Like we all came from being a kid, and routines are actually really good for us too. We tend to think I need I need my freedom. I want to be able to decide. But I think right now, especially, finding a routine for ourselves is huge. And I think it will provide a lot of comfort. We all feel very out of control right now. When am I going to get work done? When am I going to spend time with kids? So creating that routine, not just for the kids, but for ourselves, I think, at least for me, has really helped put me, like, I mean, I'm still organizing my routine, but it's putting me back into feeling like, okay, I understand how this can work now, and I understand how I can feel like I am doing a good job in each part of my life instead of like I'm kind of failing at everything because I'm trying to do it all at once.
Well, and I love that you say that because it is, there actually is a lot of freedom in a routine. But
Yeah.
I do think people, some people do kind of bristle against the idea of being locked into that, but it really is helpful. And it helps us thrive and them. So it's something we
Mhm.
work on a lot. But you mentioned something else about like being mindful and that mind, kind of having mindfulness around it. And perspective is actually the seventh thing that I've added. So
Oh,
presence and perspective, because a lot of what we do is about shifting our perspective. And
mhm.
I know this is another area where if you don't fully understand the work that people can kind of bristle, but it's hard to say like only focus on the positive. But the idea is not to like focus on the positive at like excluding the negative. It's just to kind of honor it and to recognize that there is positive against the negative, or that there is kind of
Mhm.
this, what you would consider to be like a silver lining. And really working with kids on that as well. And so that's another area, as you mentioned, our kids can be like little reflections of us. They
Yeah.
definitely absorb, they're little sponges for everything that we do. So it's just a really great practice to start. And it also really helps us truly shift our perspective when we start acknowledging the just like even like those little moments, like those little threads throughout the day that were really beautiful. It helps
Mhm.
us kind of shift that. And in order to do that, we really have to be present with them. And so those are kind of the two
Yeah.
things, especially for parents, that I've added in the stress literature is, to kind of help weather those is thinking
Yeah.
about being present and shifting that perspective. So I love that you mentioned being mindful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a big part of what I do with my parents or my moms. I don't really work with dads as much. Um, but yeah, how do you kind of take a look at what you're doing and identify your barriers to success, right? And that can be applied to anything, not just your healthy choices, but your parenting. And I had on a speaker guest on Monday, Nancy DeMaria, and she had written this book. And one of the things that she said about kind of parenting in general was how do I how do I deal with my child who who is kind of out of control right now? I can't really figure out what's wrong with them. And a big part of that is going into yourself and being, kind of where are the things that I'm scared of in myself, and maybe I'm seeing that in my child, and maybe that's what's causing this big kind of I can't figure out how to react to this because you haven't figured out how to react to it in yourself yet. And so I think that is a big part of weight loss and healthy living, but also parenting. And I thought that was an interesting perspective.
Well, if you think about it, children develop in relationship, right? So we were just talking about the fact that we're biologically engineered to be in community, but we start learning in community before we're even born. So our kids
Right.
start learning our voices and hearing them because communication is so powerful, truly in utero. And then by 3 months, they can identify whether or not like someone is speaking their home language or a foreign
Mm-hmm.
language, because we are literally that attuned. And so if you start to think about things like how you react to your children, one of the questions I get all the time is, how do I get my kids to listen to me? And the truth is, they're listening all the time, but they're not just listening to your words, they're listening to your actions and to whatever energy you're putting out there. So if you're anxious, they're responding to your anxiety. But the other thing is, they're communicating in their own way. And I have a dear friend who is called the parenting mentor, Sue Groner, and she posted something
Oh
this
yeah.
week on Instagram that is so, so true. And it's talking about misbehavior and the fact that what we deem as misbehavior, all behavior is just a form of communication. And
Yeah.
so we, as psychologists, it really is about figuring out, okay, what is she trying to communicate? What is, my son or daughter trying to communicate? How am I responding to that? And then how is that reaction making this better or worse, right? So we talk a lot about the attention principle, and like what we give attention gets repeated because our children, as we mentioned earlier, crave our presence. They want us. So they're going to do whatever it takes. It's funny. My husband was like, I do not believe that kids would like misbehave to get our attention. And then by our third child, he was like, okay. He's like, you went, that fully happens, right? Now by the fourth one, he's a pro, but it does. I mean, they're adaptive. They'll do whatever they can to get our attention. So we have to really think about how we respond to behaviors we don't want to see by diminishing the amount of attention that we give them and giving them really positive and almost over the top attention sometimes for the behaviors that we do want to see, or just reacting really positively. It doesn't necessarily have to be over the top unless we're trying to work on shifting a behavior. If there's a problem behavior that we want to diminish versus like just praising them and enjoying the behaviors that we do see. So
Yeah, exactly. How do you take almost what can be a negative because you're like, oh, how do I deal with this and see it as a positive? Same with how we deal with ourselves, right? And also identify in my son, oh, his outbursts are when he feels like he's disappointed us. And realizing, oh, that's what it is. That's the angle I need to approach this at.
yeah. Well, so this is again where I go back to boundaries. And it's really funny that you say that because as a people pleaser, so if that is, something that you like honor in yourself and then also struggle with, you have to set
Mhm.
boundaries. And within those boundaries, again, is freedom, right? So when you set those boundaries for yourself, it actually really, really helps because you can say, okay, this is something I can take on. This is going to refill me. But as soon as I cross that boundary line, I know that it's going to deplete me. So that's where I draw the line. And it's the
Okay.
same thing for our kids. If you think about behaviors, if we set those boundaries and really clear expectations on the front end for them, even
Mhm.
as we're trapped at home, the more we do that, the better they're going to respond to that behavior because they don't want to misbehave. It's just like they're kind of in this place of let's try anything and see what sticks on the wall sort of
Yeah.
mode, right?
Yeah.
They're like, all right, we'll try it. They're learning. And so the more that we can have clear expectations with them and then reinforce the behaviors that we see or create those
Mhm.
boundaries and give them more safety and security, the better. And it's funny, a lot of that work started with kids in early childhood, but it applies to teenagers and kids in,
Mhm.
high school and middle school as well. So
Yeah. Um, I just want to say if anybody on the call, a couple people have joined and one of them left. So I think people are kind of hopping in and out. If anybody has questions, post them in the chat and I'll get to them and then we'll open it up again at the end. Um, One of the things that I wanted to ask about personally is, and I'm not sure if this kind of fits into your wheelhouse, but one of the things I struggle with as we go back to the concept of creating a routine and setting the boundaries. Let's just say screen time because that's kind of where we are. There's a lot of screens for school, which becomes hard, but also, as you mentioned, your husband's with the kids in the morning, you're in the afternoon, and I feel like, I've kind of said, here's what my ideal situation is and structure would be with the iPads. But he is his own person. He's his own parent. I don't want to micromanage too much. And it kind of differs. Like he allows that iPad there. How do you find that balance between two parents who are juggling kind of full control in chunks of the day and maybe have different ideas of what the routine and expectations are for each section of the day.
yeah, no, it's a really fair point. So there are a couple of ways to negotiate this, and one of them is to align your values, right? To sit down and have a conversation and to map out the day together and say, okay, here's the expectation. If you want to use the iPad, and screen time is a loaded one because I will
Mm-hmm.
say I actually just posted on Instagram yesterday about this because it's a question that comes up all the time, especially with the school screen. So it's a constant
Mm-hmm.
fight and negotiation. But one of the things that I'll say is that there's to be really frank with screen time. The way that you need to investigate screen time specifically is looking at your children and how they're responding. So there are
Mm-hmm.
real reasons that psychologists want us to limit screen time. and specifically real reasons because we know that it can affect their attention spans later. It affects their ability to regulate their emotions and their feelings and causes behaviors that are out of control. So we know it interferes with our frontal lobe, which is what helps us control those emotions to make better judgments, things like that. And those are developing areas. So it does have real biological effects in terms of we know that we have less gray matter if you watch more screen time earlier, right? So there are those things that are very kind of out there and we think about it and it's like, okay, we know, but right now in the moment, I need this. And then there are the things in the moment that impact us, right? Which is if you set a boundary for your child, are they able to follow that boundary? Are they able to say, okay, I have 15 minutes of screen time. And when that 15 minutes is up, or those 2 shows, or that 30 minutes, or that 1 movie, I'm done with it. And they transition to the next activity perfectly. Because if they do that, and then you don't have any behavioral issues for up to a couple of hours after that, then you're probably okay. And then it's probably something that you can acquiesce on if your kids are transitioning okay. If they're putting up any sort of resistance or any sort of fight, then that definitely becomes something that you need to be aware of. But even I would say even more, things that parents like to forget to look at is if like 30 minutes to 45 minutes afterwards, you're asking them to do something and they're just having these like kind of meltdowns or the whines, you know, link it back to the screen time. Start investigating if that's happening because they're hungry, because they're tired, or because maybe 30 minutes ago they had screen time and they're not actually able to regulate themselves physically. So it's a physiological issue. And so then that becomes, you have to make a decision with your partner on do you cut back the screen time or do you reduce the expectations on your children? Because it's not fair to them for us to not provide those boundaries, but then put on unfair expectations that they still have to regulate their emotions after we've given them these screens, right? The other thing that you asked about, the second part of that is talking to your husband and determining what the values are, right? The values of the household. When I meet with family, it's one of the first things I do when I sit down with parents is I ask them to identify and map out what their values are. So I get a lot of parents that will come in and they're like, we know that we can't praise our children and we can only praise their effort. And, you know, we're only supposed to do this so that they don't become like praise mongers. And I'm like, whoa. If you want them to be persistent, if persistence is an issue or grit is an issue, then yeah, don't praise your kids. But if that's not an issue or concern for your children, then it's okay if you praise them directly or if you tell them that you're proud of them. Like you don't always have to say, you know, how does that make you feel? Or what, you know, wow. So, you know, we take these pieces from psychology and from the literature and from media and we're like, oh, we can't do this, we can do this. And there's an overwhelm out there. But what we forget is we have to identify what our values are for our children. Do we want them to be happy? Do we want them to be kind? Do we want them to be empathic? Do we want all of those? We just want them to be well-rounded. So there are a lot of different things to look at. But with specifically negotiating, when I meet with co-parents, whether they are married or living apart or, you know, together, like cohabitating and co-parenting, I ask them to negotiate what their values are and to talk about that. And so,
excuse me. He's asking for his iPad.
His iPad. Perfect timing.
Your iPad is in the playroom. Tell Daddy it's on one of the shelves, and only if it's okay with Daddy. Remember, he's in charge.
Yeah. He said I could ask tonight.
Okay, can you close the door? And that's where I think it's hard with the little one, right? Because big one's in school, and we do have kind of, we set an expectation first. Okay, you have it for 30 minutes or you have it at this time of day. And that works for him. On the weekends when there is less boundaries, he is way more emotional about it. But the little one, because he doesn't understand as well, and because of the homeschool for the big kid, there is a lot of, okay, you can go on your iPad for a little bit while we work with, you know, we're just one-on-one because we're trading off who's working. So, you know, there is this, oh, sure, you can have this iPad time while we do this, and it's an indefinite amount of time. So he's the one we're struggling most with, and that's the one where I think we're less on the same page with. But because he's so small, it's easier to kind of like control him, whereas my bigger one needs the boundaries because when he flips out, he's A, huge, like physically, and B, you know, he reacts bigger than this little one. He's a little more, you can easily kind of turn him in a different direction.
Yeah, and redirection is great. I mean, so there are a couple of different things. The first thing is setting those expectations on the front end. And
Yeah.
that's throughout the day. And I will say the more you and your husband can be on the same page with what those expectations are. And even like my husband, my kids obviously very early learned that I'm the one that says no, and then they'll go to my
Yes.
husband and say, "Did you ask your mom?" And they'll say, "She said yes." You know.
Yes,
So
they do that.
right. So once that happens, they figure that out really, really quickly. But what you do is you set the expectation. The more you can be on the same page, the better. But then the other thing is, and this is an unfair burden that falls to the parent that is going to be a little bit more strict, is you offset the time, right? So if your husband gives 15 minutes, then there are two things to do. You can either say, all right, no, iPad time, you had it earlier, like you took it early today, and tomorrow we can reset. But you can also negotiate with your husband. Okay, you had iPad time today with them, so tomorrow it's my time, right? And so that can be the other alternative in that is sort of making sure that they're not overexposed. I think the other thing that we forget about is secondhand screen time, and the fact that they're, you know, if I'm sitting there scrolling through like Instagram or Facebook or watching television, watching the news, they may be sitting there watching with me. And it's not that they're enjoying it, but they're still exposed to it, and it's still passive screen time. And so it's hard. It's definitely something to negotiate. But then the other thing is how we respond to the behaviors after the fact. And that is, you know, again, giving attention to appropriate behaviors and then letting them regulate, because they do need a little bit of time to sort of regulate their emotions. But again, staying firm and staying consistent. Consistency and clear expectations are really huge. And that's always, I mean, even more so now, given everything that we're going through, because it does provide security. But for kids, it's always having clear, consistent expectations, and then consistent responses to those expectations is really optimal.
Cool. Well, I love it. Is there anything else that you want to add here, or that you feel like we could really benefit from?
No, the only thing I'll say, I know we talked a little bit about like refilling and recharging. One of the things that I have been recommending to my families lately is kind of 3 things that you can do to like refill together. And one of them is kind of stepping into their world for a little bit and like letting them drive the bus. You know, we talked a little bit about power and control, and we forget our kids don't have a lot of control over their day to day. And especially as we set routines, part of the reason I love setting routines is to give them a little flexibility of saying, what do you want to do in this time? But the more that we can actually let them even control us and like empower them to like set the agenda for themselves. So one of the things that I love to do with each of my kids is whether we take time individually or we take time all together. And I mentioned I have 4 and the ages vary. So usually doing time together or splitting it by the 2 is what works for us, just because otherwise we don't have the time every day. But my daughters will be like, okay, we want to bake today, you know, and so sort of stepping into their world, or we want to go on a nature walk, or we want to, you know, whatever. And so I'll take that time and we'll set 20 minutes to do whatever they want to do. And that really, it's funny, I have to be really present about it, because sometimes I'll be really reluctant. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this today. Like I'm really out in the mood, or I've got so many other
play Power Rangers.
I don't want to play Power Rangers. That's exactly. But then the other thing is, if that doesn't work for you, maybe what will work for you is bringing them into something that you really enjoy. So we talked about passion and pleasures, and my kids will watch me do like yoga in the morning, and they're like, can I do it? Can I do it? And I'm like, no, because that's my time. Like that's my coveted, cherished time. But if I do my set or routine in the morning, and then I let them do a mini set with me in the afternoon, it's actually a lot of fun. So taking 20 minutes to kind of bring them into our space or our world is really, really key. And then just because it's Earth Day, the other thing is there's a lot of like amazing research on just being outdoors with your kids and what that does for your immune system and just for your mental health in general. And it does not have to be like, you don't have to have a massive yard. So if you're in New York City and you have a balcony or you've got a courtyard in your building, like truly just kind of 15 minutes really, really helps sort of reset and boost moods and things like that. So it's a nice way to just
Power Rangers outside. I could do that.
Yeah. But it's true, just being out, you know, as the weather thankfully is starting to warm up, it's a good reminder that just being outside and having like just even a 10-minute walk with our kids is great. So just a few things that I've been talking to parents about to help them sort of
Love
refill.
that.
Yeah.
Those are great. Is there anything that anywhere else people can catch you, anywhere you want to kind of point people towards to get more of you or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, so I post often, or I'm starting to post often. I am the technically least savvy person, but I'm posting more on Instagram at Dr. Courtney Bolton. And then I also have my website. I have a little blog at Dr. Courtney. It's drcourtneybolton.com. And so
Cool.
I have a little newsletter if people want to sign up for that there. And I'm sending out a lot of tips that are relevant to whatever is going on kind of in dealing with the pandemic and then just in managing self-care and then also our kids and their behaviors. So
Cool. I love it. Well, maybe I'll link to one of those blog posts in the next newsletter so people can see what you're up to, because I think what you have to say is really helpful and speaks to my audience a lot, because it's a lot of what we work on and finding that crossover and how it crosses over more into parenting. So awesome.
great. Well,
All right.
thanks.
Well, thank you so much. This was fun.
It was great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.